February is the month of love. So why not talk about a love story? Chasing Amy is about a lot of kinds of love, but in the end, only one couple can work out. In 1996, Kevin Smith wrote a movie about a lesbian falling for Ben Affleck. Obviously this was doomed from the start, but we will get a lot of Joey Lauren Adams yelling at Ben Affleck outside from this movie.
That's who I am!
Chasing Amy is a film about a man who falls for a woman. Tale as old as time. What's different here is that the woman is gay. Film opens at a comic convention with our protagonists, Banky and Holden, creators of the Blunt Man and Chronic comic, which is inspired by Jay and Silent Bob, of course, and they're doing autographs. Banky gets into a scuffle with a fan who harps on him for being a tracer, and it is here that I have to pause for the first time to explain something. In the comics industry, there is a role called the inker, and as Banky explains in the movie, his job is to go over the lines with ink to give them, more definition. They have the guy at the stand, being like, "Oh, so you're a fucking tracer then?" And I'm pretty sure that was Casey Affleck who was there with him too, who also joined in on harping on Banky. Ben Affleck's getting his brother some work. It's very important. Okay, this is actually a very important job in the industry. Because the pencils, pencils are fine. Pencils look great. Inking adds a whole nother layer of things. I'm sure we've all heard of Rob Liefeld at this point. He's famous for being a terrible comic artist. He got his big start in the industry on the book Hawk and Dove. And he was just... the only reason his shit looked good at that point was because of the inker. He wouldn't even finish the hands and feet. He would just say, "Alright, this is done, ink it." And then fucking Carl Kessel, who is basically the inking god of the industry, and I think he's still going today, he would go in and he would not only make the art look good, he would add on the hands and feet. That's the sort of thing an inker will do. This is an essential part of the thing. And that's why when people talk about Rob Liefeld's art looking good, they point to Hawk and Dove, and you know what? If you can take Rob Liefeld and make it look palatable, then I think maybe your job is important.
Get back to work, Stuart.
Holden meets Alyssa, and he's immediately interested. She's working on a comic book of her own. It's like an indie thing about relationships, but yeah, Holden wants to be sort of like he's not just interested in the superhero game. He's trying to be like an artsy kind of guy. Very cosmopolitan, but he's immediately smitten with her. She invites them to hang out after the con, and one thing leads to another. They're just making buddies, and they end up eventually at a bar that is obviously, just so obviously, a lesbian bar. And they have no idea. Banky and Holden show up. And they can't tell. I don't know how they don't know. There's 4 men in the whole building. There's those 2. There's Hooper. And there's the drummer for the band. When they do finally find out, the reactions are they're really telling of the sort of people that Holden and Banky are. Banky goes wide-mouthed, huge grin, clapping loudly, this is the best thing he's seen all night, girls kissing. Holden he's both disappointed and also, almost repulsed by what he's seeing. And these are the 2 reactions that you will very often see to same-sex couples with women. Is, men either being like, "Oh, that's hot," but having absolutely no actual respect, or, "I hate to see this because that ruined my chances." But holy crap, how dense are they? A, she's wearing a mesh top. B, this bar is called Meow Mix. The Holden's an idiot. And hey, there's Matt Damon.
Up yours, Matt Damon.
They wind up being friends anyway. They're hanging out, they go play skee-ball, they do things. But the whole time Holden has this thing in the back of his head where he just... what he's after, what he wanted from the get-go, he still wants. He wants a relationship. And this all comes to bubble up when they're in a car together in the rain, and he's like, "I have a confession to make." and he puts it all out. He tells her he loves her, he doesn't want to just be friends, he says maybe he's fucking up their friendship, but he needs to say this, and she's just pissed. Oh my god, and why wouldn't she be? There's a concept that desperate men like to put out there called the friend zone. You know, oh, I'm trapped in the friend zone. I was making friendly with this woman, and all she wanted to be was friends, and how horrible of her. But, like, there is an opposite thing that women experience called the relationship zone, where, you know what, being friends with somebody is a whole lot more common than being in a relationship with somebody. And that is 100% what's happened with Alyssa here. He has put her firmly into the relationship zone, and that's not what she was after. And this is the thing, is that she wants to be friends with him. And she's pissed off because he basically weaponized their friendship. And I've been there. I don't think anybody hasn't been there. But, like, yeah, it sucks when somebody that you're, you know, that you're in a situation with takes that and twists it to get you to do something that you're not comfortable with. And that's what he's asking for. That's what he's demanding. He's saying, I'm holding our friendship hostage. You need to, you know, what I want is for us to go to the next level. That's not something she had even considered wanting. And that's a betrayal, and she tells him as much. But in the end, she values him as a friend so much that she's willing to give it a shot. And so she comes back, and that's what she goes for. You know, she considers him her best friend, and losing that is frankly a terrifying prospect. Banky feels threatened by all this. He's still very awful. He digs up dirt on Alyssa, but he presents it like he's doing Holden a favor. You know, he's basically, they're all from the same small town in Jersey. And so he's able to just talk to old high school friends and say, hey, do you know this person? And one of them does tell him some information that she engaged in a three-way with a couple of dudes that they went to high school with. And that her nickname in high school was Finger Cuffs. You know, like, basically the Chinese finger cuffs, you know, where if you pull, you got a finger in both ends, basically. And that's even in the school yearbook, so he's able to pull that out. And just the way Banky frames it, you know, what if it gets out that she's queer? What if she has a disease? Just like, this was the 90s. You know, the AIDS crisis was still a thing that people were talking about, and still a thing that was very, you know, it should still be a thing that's fresh in people's minds. It is technically still ongoing. You know, the what if she has a disease thing is just one of those old, you know, classic homophobic tropes from back in the day. Affleck threatens to put Banky's teeth down his throat if he keeps this up and just storms out. He then goes and he has a conversation with his friend Hooper, who we saw at the Comic-Con at the start. I completely glazed over the whole Hooper bit at the Comic-Con. Hooper is a gay man who writes a, like, basically Black Power comic. He's like, just, he's leaning into the image of the black militant super hard. But he's like, yeah, I have to act this way because as a gay black man, I am, like, reviled by both the gay community and the black community. Which is a thing that happens, and frankly, you know, kudos to Smith for touching on this in the fucking 90s. Honestly, like, the bit with Hooper is probably the most memorable comedy scene from the whole movie, just because of the way it's played. Like, he pulls a gun and shoots Banky and yells Black Rage, and everybody runs out, and he's just like, I almost laughed my ass off when you asked me what a Nubian was. That scene is basically all I remembered of the movie from my initial viewing, aside from the fact that Joey Lauren Adams yells at Ben Affleck outside a lot. And Ben Affleck definitely deserves it here. So, Holden and Hooper are having a conversation in a record store, and Hooper just straight up tells him, Banky is obviously in love with you in a way that he is not prepared to deal with, and that's probably the source of all this jealousy. And probably also the homophobia, let's be honest. He also tells him that he needs to just ask Alyssa about her past. Just ask her. But he doesn't tell Holden how to ask her, so Holden picks possibly the worst way to bring up the conversation you possibly can. He asks her about her sexual past in public at a hockey game, completely surrounded by people. Like, imagine somebody asking you about something that sensitive in public. Obviously, she blows up. And she should, why wouldn't you be pissed at that? Holy crap. So, they run out to the parking lot, and she tells him to fuck off, and he tells her to fuck off, and he can't get over the way she's got this past, and the relationship explodes. It's a huge mess, just to put it lightly, They cut to him at a breakfast diner meeting with the inspiration for Blunt Man and Chronic, Jay and Silent Bob. He needs to give them their payment check for the royalties for, Blunt Man and Chronic, because obviously as the inspiration, apparently they're entitled to some money. I don't know if that's how it works. You don't really copyright yourself. You can base a character off of a real person and not have to pay them, I think. Silent Bob does a thing in every Kevin Smith movie where he says a line, just a short line, In Clerks, he told Dante, I don't know shit about this Caitlyn girl, but the girl you're actually dating, she brought you fucking food at lunch. How many girls would do that, right? Stick with the good thing. In Mallrats, he just says, fame, glory, a Jedi wants for none of these things. Or something like that. Just little short snippets. Hell, in Dogma, he had 2 words he said in the whole movie. No tickets. But in Chasing Amy, I think he was still figuring out what to do with the Silent Bob character, because he gets a fucking monologue. And he tells him about how there was this girl who did some things, and he couldn't get over it, but he loved her, and it was, by the time he came around, it was too late, and now he's just chasing Amy, because Amy was the girl. And that's where we get the title of the movie, Chasing Amy, is from this weird Silent Bob monologue about how you need to get over it, and you need to do something to get back with this girl, because otherwise you will just be chasing after the idea of her for the rest of your life. Or at least a while. You need to do things to get over it. But this monologue felt like too much. Silent Bob said more in this scene than Jay, and that should never be the case. So Holden is armed with this expert input, and he comes up with a plan. He calls Banky and he calls Alyssa, and they go to his office. And he tells them he has this whole thing figured out. He has a plan of attack. He tells the both of them they need to have a 3-way. Just like Alyssa did back in the day. And that way, he'll share an experience with his best friend, and they'll be stronger, and he'll share a relationship with his girlfriend that'll put him on the same level as some of her old flames, and that'll make them stronger, and it'll be great for everybody. And Banky, for the first time in the movie, has no fucking comeback. He just sits there, slack-jawed, look on his face, just, what? Just bewildered at what's being presented. The gears are turning. For the first time, they're not just going off of reflex. He's actually thinking about this. And to his credit, Hooper read him right. He says, okay, I'll do it. However, Alyssa is not down. And this is probably the best bit of acting in the entire movie, is just Joey Lauren Adams is able to portray a sort of restrained rage mixed with sadness and grief. Like, she's saying, no, I can't do this. I did this before and I can't do it anymore, and how dare you ask me for this? Like, and she just runs through. What if this goes wrong? What if this goes wrong? What if I end up falling for him? What if you end up falling for him? What if the whole thing makes just the jealousy even worse? Like, this is a road you don't want to go down. I've been there. It fucks with everybody. And in the end, she gets up, she slaps him and says, I'm not your whore. And she turns to Banky and says, he's you again. And that's honestly the end of the 3 of them. Yeah, as much as I wanted to say, as much as I've characterized the film as, relying on her yelling at him outdoors, and that does happen for very good reasons, she is probably the strongest actor in the film. No shade to Affleck, but he's not pulling off the emotional range. I don't know, she nails it. She just nails it. You know, I don't want to say bad things about Ben Affleck's acting in this, but she's just putting it on a whole nother level. Just the physicality of the rage is showing with, like, shaking. So in the aftermath of all this, Banky and Holden split. Banky is saddled with doing the comic solo, and he fails, so now he's doing his own thing. Presumably he's drawing and not just tracing. Holden went on to write something that's biographical about his whole situation, and Alyssa is doing a comic with one of her friends from an earlier scene. Holden finds her at a convention sometime later, and he just walks up and sets it down, and she doesn't notice that it's him at first. She just says, "This isn't one of my comics." And he's like, "No, but you should read it anyway. You're in it." I get a sort of, just the visuals of it, I get sort of an American Splendor Harvey Pekar vibe off of it. Harvey Pekar was a man who wrote an autobiographical comic book for decades called American Splendor. You know, it covered, you know, when he had, when there was like cancer, when he got divorced, you know, just all the hard times, all the good times. He did a comic about it. And there's a movie about that too. Maybe I'll watch it sometime. I don't know. It's autobiographical, but also dramatization. But you know, this is what I'm getting from this. It's a storybook retelling about how you fucked up all the relationship in your life.
Well, isn't that true?
I will say with this film, Kevin Smith seemed to be trying some new things. You know, he's got some new dynamic camera angles, whereas most of his work was shot before from like very much side on. We've got a tripod or a dolly for the camera. There's actual like use of angles in scenes where they wouldn't necessarily, where it would previously just be like shot counter shot dialogue or like side on, here's two people talking to each other kind of thing. There's a scene in Train Station where Ben Affleck is just making a phone call and the camera comes in at a funny angle, and I'm like, oh, that's unusual for the time. Kevin Smith must have been learning and trying new things, which he talked about this in the past at an Evening with Kevin Smith thing. He went to a film school in Vancouver that wasn't really like a school. It was like an academy that gave you a certification that said that you passed the course. It wasn't like you got a degree in anything. It was like a vocational, we trained you, here you go. Hopefully somebody takes this diploma off of you. And he went there and he didn't finish it because he was like, I'm not actually learning anything and I have a chance to go do something. So I'm gonna go do something. So like he hasn't got like a whole lot of training under his belt. He's mostly self-taught is the thing. And so when he's incorporating something new, it's noticeable. And that's a thing with Chasing Amy here is, you know, you see some unusual camera work for him. You see him trying new things with Silent Bob's dialogue. And, like, I need to point out that this is actually impressive because this film only had a budget of, like, $250,000. Which is fucked up considering Mallrats had a budget of $6 million. He talked about the budget in one of the Evening with Kevin Smith things, where he said he went to the studio and he was like, hey, I got a script for a movie. What do you think? And they greenlit it. They said, all right, we'll give you, you know, this much money. Here's the actors you're going to cast in it. We want you to include, and I'm not making this up, the actors he was requested to use were Jon Stewart, David Schwimmer, and Drew Barrymore. And Smith was just like, well, no, I wrote these parts for my people. You know, these are things for their strong points. This is stuff I've written for them. I want my people in this. And the studio was like, well, then we're not gonna give you money for it. Come on now. And he wound up going to the head of the studio, which I must loathfully admit was Harvey Weinstein of all people, and said, hey, I want to do this movie, and they wouldn't give me money for it. And he's just like, oh shit, how much do you need for it? I don't know. 200,000? It's like, oh shit, I'll give you 250. And he's like, well, okay, that's still not a whole lot, but we'll do it. You know, as long as he's able to use his people, he will try to make it work. And he's like, I made Clerks on a budget of like $50,000. So, we can do this. And when he told his production staff, his buddy was just like, "What the fuck is wrong with you? I don't know if we can make this movie on that budget." He apparently stressed himself out enough that he was able to pull it off, but, It's mind-boggling to me that there was a time when David Schwimmer was considered a bigger draw than Ben Affleck. That just seems bananas to me. Now, the DVD I have of this came with a little fun instructional booklet. It's got a map of the area that everybody, lives in. It's got, the Leonardo borough, basically. They call it the Tri-Town area, even though it's actually like 5 towns. But, Leonardo, shouldn't be a county, but they do call it a county later. You even see Alyssa wearing a Leonardo shirt. The booklet has, on top of the map, it's got a little timeline of the events, which is basically, on Thursday, this girl drowned in a pool. On Friday, Clerks happened. On Saturday, Mallrats happened. And 2 years later, then Chasing Amy happens. And it's also got like a list of people who live in the place, what high school they went to, what year they graduated, etc., etc. It's weird that they put this together like this, because the DVD would have come out long after, Dogma and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Because DVD technology wasn't super prevalent in the 90s yet. So, why does this DVD booklet only include the first 3 movies, and not, say, and not Dogma, or Clerks the Animated Series for that matter? We gotta talk about the Leonardo area, though. It does become a thing in the animated series with a megalomaniacal villain named Leonardo who wants to shut down the Quick Stop. He's voiced by Alec Baldwin. It's very fun. It's just, Leonardo County, but not really a county. That's just what they call it in the trial episode. This is the location for all of his shit. It's like how Stephen King writes everything set in New England. Kevin Smith writes everything set in Leonardo County. I need to talk about the character of Banky, and how he's just basically the character Brody from Mallrats. In my opinion, honestly, that should have just been the same character. This movie takes place 2 years after the events of Mallrats. It could have been the same dude. They're both comic book people. They both have their, the witty quick delivery on lines. The obsession with, sex stuff. Brody talked to Stan Lee, and he had questions about the thing's dick. And, the Hulk's dick. And Reed Richards' dick. Given that Banky was later revealed to be a closeted gay man himself, would it not have made sense for the sharp-witted comic book guy who's obsessed with dick to also be this character? I think you could have done that, and it would have been a nice bow on the whole thing. I know that the outro at the end of Mallrats was like, oh, Brody went on to get a TV talk show, but they probably are going to ignore that. I don't remember I don't even remember if they touched on him in the Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Some characters from Mallrats showed up in that, but it just feels weird to me. It could have been the same character. Banky is not a good person, and that's also something that needs to be discussed. He has a conversation, and he's personable enough, but when he's in private with Holden, the disdain ratchets up 5 levels. And I get the feeling that Smith probably has seen that sort of behavior himself. He's very much... He is trying his best to be an ally, and so some people behind closed doors probably have said some things to him, and he's just had to bite his tongue and be like, I see how it is. They will say things to him that they wouldn't say in front of somebody that they know is queer, Given in the film, given Holden's behavior earlier at the gay bar, it's easy to see why Banky would think that he agrees with him enough to, talk shit about lesbians,
I know you. You're way too conservative for that girl.
Now I need to address the elephant in the room. The 90s were an odd time for the gays.
Susan, I'm gay.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
For those of you who are perhaps too young to remember, it may surprise you to hear, but homophobic slurs were super common. In school, you could say, you could say some of these words and you wouldn't get in trouble at all, because it was on par with calling somebody a dick. There was only one F word that you weren't supposed to say in school, and it was fuck. I don't like it, you shouldn't like it, but that was the reality of the situation, and that was the reality of when this film was made. Kevin Smith made a movie that was true to the era it was made in, but if you're, sensitive to homophobic slurs, I would probably recommend skipping this one. If it helps at all, the character who says most of the slurs does in fact turn out to be a gay man in denial, masking that with homophobia.
Thanks. That means a lot coming from the guy who pretends to be Shaft as opposed to the guy who takes Shaft.
I don't hear you complaining nightly.
And given the turn that he took in Chasing Amy and all the blips on Hooper's gaydar, I gotta think that was the intent all along. There is a scene where Alyssa and her friends are hanging out, and she's, revealing that she's seeing somebody now, and everybody's like, "Oh, who is it? Who is she?" And Alyssa is dancing around any discussion of it. She's like, "Oh, they work in the industry. You wouldn't know them." And her friends, all being very queer themselves, are quick to pick up on pronouns and how they're used. And this is from 1996. I know it's a whole thing where people are like, "Oh, pronouns in bio didn't read," but this has been a thing in the community for decades. Her friends straight up say, "Stop playing the pronoun game. Who were you seeing?" And she's like, "It's a man." Fine. And they're just like, ugh. There's also a scene where Holden and Alyssa are hanging out on a swing set, and he decides he is entitled to talk to her about her sexuality and her exploits and whatnot. This is before they were dating. And he asks her, about, her virginity. She's like, she told him that she's never been with a man before. And that was not true, because it's later revealed that, yeah, she was with a few. 2 at the same time, in fact, at one point. But so when she tells him she's never been with a man, he's like, "Oh, so you're a virgin?" And she's like, "Well, no, I've had sex, just not with men." And he basically starts talking about, what he considers to be sex. He doesn't consider her sleeping with a woman to be real sex. He's trying to define her queerness out of existence. If her past experiences don't count as sex, then she's still a virgin, and that's something that matters to him. And it's like Hooper says in a later scene, all guys want to think that they're Christopher Columbus discovering something new. But there's nothing new out there. And that's the fucked up thing, is that she's like, "No, I lost my virginity to a woman." He's like, "Oh, that's not penetration." And he's like, "It is if you use your fingers." And he's like, "Oh, but that's not that wouldn't have broken the hymen. Never mind that's not how hymens work." And she's like, "Okay, well then I lost my virginity at 10 to a fence post." It's very much like he's trying to play the definition game, and it's not something that he can't come up with a definition on the fly to just be like, "No, this is what it means." In the first Evening with Kevin Smith release, a fan asked him about Chasing Amy, and she's very gay, and he's like, "Oh my god, are you coming out?" And she's like, "No, they all know who I am, it's fine." She asks him about how the movie perpetuates the trope of lesbians need a deep dicking, which is a thing that people say and a thing that some people believe, and is a very, very frightening thing for a lot of queer women who, frankly, have been assaulted by dudes who think that that's what they need, and it's like, no. So she's like, "Is this, do you feel at all responsible for the way that this is presented in the film, and a message that some people take away from it?" And the audience is like ready to boo her, and Kevin Smith is just like, no, you all fuck off. She's making a good point. And he hears her out, and he actually addresses her question. And you know, this is just how the audience was back then. You know, this is the sort of people that you dealt with in public. You know, the sort that got boos, and it's a very valid question. Smith, you know, telling them to shut up so that he can address her question, because it is a good question. I think it shows a lot of character on his part, and he tells her, you know, basically that's not meant to be a thing that people take from it. That this is, he put those words in the mouth of the character who is wrong and hateful the most.
Don't you understand? Like, we put those words into the guy who's always wrong in the movie.
You're not supposed to look at Banky and see a character who you're like, yeah, that guy seems like he knows what's going on. He's an idiot. And he's just supposed to be wrong. And so Kevin Smith is like, no, we put those words in the mouth of the guy who's wrong. It's actually a little bit ironic when you think about it, because in the end it turns out Banky was the one who needed Dick. In any event, I'm pretty sure Kevin Smith walked away from that question with a lot of thoughts. Because, like, he is being presented with this by somebody who's affected by this sort of thing. And it's very easy for somebody who's writing a film to be like, yeah, you know, I'll make it obvious that this is not the way to do things, but there are people who are going to misread it. And somebody who's actually experienced shit can, and probably should, be consulted, or at least, you know, have their perspective taken into account. For the time Chasing Amy came out in, it was a heck of a leap. This was a year before the whole Ellen thing landed, and this is a queer story being told by a man who, at the time, was seen as somewhat of an auteur indie darling. You know, he's a self-made filmmaker with an eye for dialogue. You know, Mallrats was very well received. Clerks was a smash hit considering what it cost to make. Unfortunately, this film was such a departure from his previous works that I can only imagine audiences went in expecting something completely different. This directly followed Mallrats, which is a raunchy, over-the-top comedy, and this is very much not. It is raunchy, and there are funny parts, but this is a relationship drama. Not only that, it is a queer relationship drama. I do like this film, but of Smith's works in the canon of the Clerks setting, or as it's called, the View Askew-niverse, I think it really stands out as the black sheep. I'd say it belongs next to Jersey Girl in that regard, but Jersey Girl actually isn't part of the series.
Yeah, I'm just as surprised by this turn of events as you.
Chasing Amy is perhaps as close to artful as Kevin Smith gets. It drags in places, it has a lot of uncomfortable language by today's standards, heck, even by then's standards, but it's got a lot of heart. My rating for this is 2.5 angry couples.